There exists in horror gaming a figure whose shadow stretches across decades, whose crimes echo through rusted animatronic shells, and whose methodology mirrors the most disturbing patterns found in real criminal psychology. William Afton wore a rabbit suit when he committed his murders. While most serial killers operate in darkness, Afton operated in bright primary colors, surrounded by birthday cake and children's laughter. The costume gave him access, gave him trust, gave him everything a predator needs to move undetected through a crowded room. This video analyzes William Afton through the framework of actual serial killer psychology, examining how his patterns, motivations, and evolution mirror documented cases from criminal history. What you're about to hear combines forensic psychology, behavioral analysis, and the disturbing reality that Afton's fictional methodology reflects techniques used by real predators. By the end, you'll understand why Afton represents something more unsettling than a video game villain. He represents a disturbingly accurate psychological portrait wrapped in animatronic horror. If you enjoy these kinds of video game essays, drop a comment about which detail connected with you, or which psychological insight made you rethink the character. You can also suggest topics for future deep dives. Some of the strongest video concepts have emerged from your suggestions, and watching this community grow through those comment conversations remains the most rewarding part of creating these. So settle in somewhere comfortable, turn down the lights, and let's begin. Chapter 1. The Man in the Rabbit Suit. William Afton was invisible for years. Players encountered purple sprites in mini-games, saw glimpses of someone in a mascot costume, pieced together newspaper clippings about missing children. The game never announced him. He existed as fragments, as implications, as the negative space around which the horror organized itself. This fragmentation mirrors how serial killers actually operate in communities before capture, before exposure. Ted Bundy worked at a suicide hotline. John Wayne Gacy performed as Pogo the Clown at children's hospitals. Dennis Rader served as a church council president. The horror arrives later when communities realize the predator wasn't lurking in shadows. He was coaching Little League, organizing the charity drive, wearing the Spring Bonnie costume at birthday parties. Afton co-founded Fredbear's Family Diner with Henry Emily, establishing himself as a businessman, an entrepreneur, a pillar of the entertainment industry he helped create. While Henry focused on creating characters that brought joy, Afton's engineering genius skewed darker, obsessing over the mechanics of control and capture. Afton was not just a businessman. He was a brilliant roboticist who understood exactly how to merge man and machine. This dual expertise gave Afton something crucial for a predator: technical access without suspicion. Henry's name attached to the creative vision. Afton remained in the paperwork, in the management structure, in the spaces nobody examines too closely. Serial killers who achieve high body counts typically master this invisibility. They construct legitimate facades that provide both access to victims and insulation from suspicion. Afton's business role meant his presence at restaurants raised no questions. His access to mascot suits, back rooms, and closing procedures became occupational necessity rather than evidence of predatory planning. When children went missing from Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, suspicion would fall on transient employees, on strangers, on anyone except the co-founder of the company. Research on criminal psychology shows that successful serial offenders create distinct identities: the public self that interacts normally with society, and the predatory self that emerges during hunting and killing. Afton weaponized this compartmentalization through his business structure. William Afton, the entrepreneur, existed separately from William Afton, the predator, wearing a Spring Bonnie suit in dark hallways. The costume created physical separation between these identities. Inside the suit, he became something else entirely: Mascot costumes provide predators with psychological advantages documented in criminal psychology. The costume removes individual identity, transforming the wearer into a character children trust instinctively. Eye contact disappears behind mesh or plastic eyes. Facial expressions vanish. Body language becomes cartoon physicality rather than human behavior. For children, these elements register as playful and safe. For predators, these same elements provide anonymity and psychological distance from their actions. The Spring Bonnie suit specifically gave Afton additional advantages. Spring Lock suits function as both animatronic characters and wearable costumes, creating ambiguity about whether children encountered a mechanical performer or a costumed employee. This ambiguity disrupted pattern recognition. If a child mentioned, "The yellow rabbit took me to a back room," investigators would search for a person in a costume. If another witness reported seeing the Spring Bonnie animatronic moved from its stage position, investigators would assume mechanical malfunction. The suit's dual nature fragmented evidence before evidence could coalesce into a recognizable pattern. Behavioral analysis distinguishes between organized and disorganized offenders. Disorganized killers act impulsively, leave chaotic crime scenes, make little effort to hide evidence. Organized killers plan meticulously, control crime scenes, take deliberate steps to frustrate investigation. Afton operated as a highly organized offender. He didn't stumble into murders. He engineered an environment where murders could occur repeatedly with built-in mechanisms to disperse suspicion. Consider what Afton constructed before his first confirmed kill. He established legitimate business ownership. He ensured his presence at locations would never seem unusual. He identified a method of approaching children that bypassed normal, stranger danger instincts. He created a physical disguise that fragmented witness descriptions. He gained access to back rooms, safe rooms, and spaces hidden from both public view and architectural blueprints. These aren't crimes of passion or opportunity. These are crimes of architecture. Afton built his hunting ground before he began hunting. The safe room deserves specific attention. Fazbear Entertainment locations included hidden rooms invisible to animatronic navigation systems and absent from digital floor plans. Phone Guy's training tapes reference these spaces as employee-only areas for donning spring lock suits. For Afton, these rooms served a different purpose. They provided killing floors where he could murder children without security cameras, without witnesses, without any physical evidence visible to customers or routine employees. He didn't discover these spaces. He helped design them. This level of premeditation appears in cases involving predators with long-term access to victim populations. Larry Nassar didn't randomly assault young gymnasts. He constructed a treatment methodology that normalized invasive procedures, secured institutional protection, and ensured victims couldn't articulate abuse without appearing to misunderstand legitimate medical practice. Jerry Sandusky didn't stumble into opportunities to assault children. He founded a charity specifically serving at-risk youth, creating a victim pipeline with institutional legitimacy. Afton's approach mirrors these patterns. He didn't adapt to opportunities, he manufactured them. But all of this planning, all of this infrastructure, all of this careful, predatory architecture existed before his documented crimes began. Something had to trigger the transition from potential to action. Before we examine that transformation, before we dive into the personal tragedies that shaped Afton's pathology, we need to pause and understand something crucial. The Spring Bonnie costume wasn't just creative horror design. It represents a methodology with disturbing real-world parallels. Afton's approach, using a beloved character to approach victims, weaponizing trust through entertainment personas, hiding behind community respectability. These aren't invented tactics. They're documented patterns used by actual predators. The rabbit suit mirrors something that already existed in criminal history. And understanding that parallel reveals just how grounded in actual predatory psychology Afton's character truly is. Chapter 2: The Clown and the Rabbit. Before we examine what drove William Afton to become a killer, we need to understand just how effective his primary weapon was. The Spring Bonnie costume wasn't an original concept. Afton wasn't the first to have the idea of using a beloved character to approach victims. He was following a blueprint written by one of America's most notorious serial killers, John Wayne Gacy. Between 1972 and 1978, Gacy murdered at least 33 young men and boys in Cook County, Illinois. He buried 26 of them in the crawl space beneath his house. During those same years, Gacy was a respected community member. He managed 3 Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurants. He served as a Democratic precinct captain. He organized cultural events and fundraising activities. And he performed at children's hospitals and charitable events as Pogo the Clown. The parallels between Gacy and Afton are disturbing in their precision. Both men constructed legitimate public identities that provided cover for predatory behavior. Gacy's position as a restaurant manager and community organizer made him appear trustworthy and civically engaged. Afton's role as co-founder of a children's entertainment company served the same function. Both men weaponized their reputations. When suspicion arose, the cognitive dissonance was too severe for communities to process. How could the man who brings joy to sick children be murdering boys? How could the man who built Freddy Fazbear's Pizza be luring children to their deaths? But the costume element is where the comparison becomes most instructive. Gacy created 2 clown personas, Pogo the Clown and Patches the Clown. He designed the costumes himself, including the makeup. He performed at fundraisers, parades, children's parties, and hospital visits. Children loved Pogo. Parents trusted Pogo. Pogo was safe, friendly, associated with charity and kindness. John Wayne Gacy, the contractor, might raise questions. Pogo the Clown raised none. Criminal psychologists who studied Gacy after his arrest noted something crucial. The clown persona served as his ultimate legitimacy shield. The cognitive dissonance between man who entertains sick children and serial killer was so severe that it delayed investigation even when warning signs emerged. The costume didn't just entertain children. It protected Gacy from scrutiny by creating an identity so wholesome that suspicion seemed impossible. Afton's use of Spring Bonnie functions identically. When he wore the yellow rabbit suit, he inhabited a character children trusted instinctively. They didn't see William Afton the businessman. They saw Spring Bonnie, the entertainer. The costume removed his individual identity and replaced it with something universally trusted. And that trust created access that William Afton as himself could never achieve. The psychological mechanism here involves what researchers call occupational camouflage. Certain professions and roles carry such strong positive associations that they function as invisibility cloaks for predators. Teachers, coaches, clergy, medical professionals, and children's entertainers all occupy categories where predatory behavior seems categorically impossible. The role itself becomes the disguise. Gacy understood this instinctively. So did Afton. Both men also exploited the specific vulnerabilities of costume characters. Children are taught that strangers are dangerous, but that authority figures and entertainment characters are safe. A random adult approaching a child and saying, "Come with me," triggers alarm. A clown at a hospital or a mascot at a pizza restaurant saying the same thing triggers compliance. The costume short-circuits every protective instinct parents spend years teaching their children. Gacy used his clown persona to build community trust, creating a public image so positive that allegations against him seemed absurd. When young men disappeared after visiting his house, when neighbors complained about suspicious smells, when police received multiple reports about Gacy. His standing as Pogo the Clown and respected businessman created institutional resistance to treating him as a serious suspect. The investigation that eventually caught him was delayed by years, specifically because the cognitive dissonance was too severe. Afton used Spring Bonnie the same way. The mascot costume made predatory approaches seem innocent. Leading children away from parties became showing them something special. Bringing them to back rooms became part of the entertainment experience. The costume transformed every predatory action into something that appeared legitimate, even wholesome. The victim selection also parallels. Gacy primarily targeted teenage boys and young men, often from marginalized backgrounds. Runaways, sex workers, young men unlikely to be immediately reported missing. These victims represented maximum vulnerability, with minimum immediate investigation. Afton targeted children at family entertainment venues, young enough to be easily manipulated, in crowded enough environments that brief absences wouldn't immediately alarm parents, isolated enough once removed from crowds that resistance became impossible. Both men also benefited from institutional reluctance to investigate respected community members. Multiple people reported concerns about Gacy to police before his arrest. Young men were seen entering his house and never seen again. Neighbors complained about foul smells emanating from his property. Police investigated half-heartedly, accepted Gacy's explanations. His community standing created institutional resistance to treating him as a serious suspect. The same dynamic protected Afton. When children disappeared from Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, the co-founder of the company remained above suspicion despite having access to everything necessary to commit the crimes. But perhaps the most disturbing parallel is what happened after both men were caught. Gacy showed no genuine remorse. He claimed the victims were prostitutes who deserved what happened to them. He portrayed himself as a victim of media persecution. He maintained that he was a good person who had done good things for his community. The murders were either someone else's responsibility or somehow justified. This absolute refusal to accept responsibility, this insistence that he was the wronged party despite overwhelming evidence, represents pathological narcissism in its purest form. Even on death row, Gacy painted clown artwork and sold it, maintaining his pogo persona as if the clown character could somehow remain separate from his crimes. He gave interviews where he described his clown performances as relaxation therapy, discussing them warmly while showing no emotion when discussing his victims. Afton exhibits identical psychology. Even after death, after spring lock failure, after being burned multiple times, he continues. He never accepts that what he did was wrong. He never shows remorse. He never stops pursuing victims. His persistence represents the same narcissistic refusal to accept accountability that Gacy demonstrated. Both men built internal narratives where they were the protagonists, where their actions made sense, where they deserved to continue existing despite the damage they caused. The comparison reveals something crucial about Afton's character design. He's not a supernatural monster who happens to use serial killer methodology. He's a serial killer who happens to exist in a supernatural universe. His patterns mirror documented cases because those patterns are what real predators use. The Spring Bonnie costume is Pogo the Clown. Freddy Fazbear's Pizza is the crawl space. The missing children incident is the decades Gacy operated before anyone stopped him. Understanding Gacy's methodology helps us understand Afton's because they're employing the same strategy. Both men recognized that beloved characters and community roles provide predatory advantages that normal approaches can't match. Both weaponized trust through entertainment personas. Both exploited institutional protection that comes with community standing. Both maintained functional public lives while committing atrocities in private. Both refused accountability even when caught. The difference is that Gacy eventually faced justice. He was arrested in December 1978 and executed on May 10, 1994, after spending 14 years on death row. His victims' families achieved some measure of closure knowing he couldn't hurt anyone else. The nightmare ended. The predator died. The community could begin healing. Afton's victims never received that closure because Afton refuses to stay dead. His supernatural persistence represents the nightmare scenario. What if Gacy had come back? What if the execution failed and he continued operating? What if no amount of institutional response could permanently stop him? What if the clown never stopped performing? This is why Afton resonates as a horror character. He's John Wayne Gacy with immortality. He's every case where the predator operated too long before being stopped, except he's never actually stopped. He's the worst case scenario made literal, and understanding the real case he mirrors makes his fictional horror more disturbing because we recognize that every element except the supernatural persistence actually happened. Pogo the clown was real. The crawl space was real. The decades of institutional protection were real. The community trust that delayed investigation was real. The narcissistic refusal to accept responsibility was real. The only fictional element is that Gacy eventually died and stayed dead. Chapter 3. The Bite That Broke Everything. Afton's youngest son spent his final days terrified. The mini-games show a child tormented by his older brother, locked in rooms with animatronic figures, crying alone in dark spaces. The Fredbear plush appears constantly, offering comfort. That voice belonged to William Afton, monitoring his son through a camera and speaker embedded in the toy. Parenting reduced to surveillance. Comfort automated through technology. Afton couldn't be present. Between managing business operations and conducting whatever projects consumed his attention in private, Afton substituted monitoring for parenting. The camera setup demonstrates technical sophistication. He could watch his sons from remote locations, could speak to them through the plush, could maintain awareness of his household without actually entering it. But awareness isn't presence. Surveillance isn't protection. The bite happened during a party at Fredbear's family diner. The older brother and his friends tormented the younger boy throughout the day, wearing masks, jumping out from hiding spots, escalating the terror. The final act involved carrying the crying child to the Fredbear animatronic and shoving his head into the mechanical mouth. The jaw closed. The skull fractured. The child died shortly after. Parental neglect contributed directly to this death. The older brother's bullying had been ongoing, visible, escalating. No adult intervened. At a birthday party in Afton's own establishment, surrounded by staff and customers, his youngest son was carried, screaming, to an animatronic and killed through what appeared to be mechanical malfunction, but stemmed from deliberate human action. Every safety mechanism failed simultaneously. From a psychological perspective, this represents a catastrophic failure that would devastate any parent. Child death by accident produces grief compounded by guilt. Child death through negligence produces something darker. The parent must confront not only loss, but complicity. Why wasn't I watching? Why didn't I stop the bullying? Why did I create entertainment machines dangerous enough to kill children? Criminal psychology recognizes certain traumatic experiences as potential accelerants for latent violent tendencies. Not everyone who experiences trauma becomes violent, but individuals already predisposed toward antisocial behavior, toward viewing others as objects rather than people, toward lacking empathy or remorse, can experience trauma as permission rather than warning. The trauma becomes justification. The loss becomes an excuse. The pain becomes the reason they're allowed to create pain. Afton's response to his son's death reveals his psychological framework. The final minigame shows the Fredbear plush speaking to the dying child. I will put you back together. This wasn't metaphorical comfort. Afton meant this literally. He would restore his son to life through technological means. He would solve death the way he solved business problems, through engineering, through experimentation, through force of will and intellectual superiority. Instead of processing loss, instead of accepting death as an irreversible reality, Afton rejected death's permanence entirely. His son wouldn't stay dead because Afton wouldn't allow it. This grandiosity reveals narcissistic personality patterns common in organized serial offenders. The rules governing normal human experience don't apply because they're superior to those constraints. Death is simply a problem they haven't solved yet. But Afton needed a blueprint. He needed proof that consciousness could survive outside biological death. He needed evidence that souls could bind to machines. And then Charlotte Emily died outside Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and her soul possessed the security puppet. This gave Afton his proof. Somewhere in the aftermath of Charlotte's death, Afton observed something impossible, genuine supernatural phenomena, a dead child's consciousness functioning inside an animatronic shell. The puppet moved with intent, it acted with purpose. It retained enough of Charlotte's identity to protect other children, to grant them the same unnatural persistence she experienced. For Afton, this confirmed everything his desperation wanted to believe. Death wasn't final. Consciousness could transfer. His son could still be saved. But there's a problem with this timeline, with this reading of Afton as a grieving father seeking resurrection. The problem is Charlotte herself. Charlotte didn't die by accident. She died because William Afton murdered her. He killed his business partner's daughter deliberately, and that murder happened after his own son's death. Meaning Afton didn't observe supernatural phenomena. He created it. He killed Charlotte specifically to see if death could be overcome. Either way, the moment Afton killed Charlotte Emily, any sympathy for his grief should evaporate. He didn't lose his way. He chose a direction, and that direction led to more bodies, more experiments, more children lured into back rooms by a man in a yellow rabbit suit. Chapter 4. The First Kill. Charlotte Emily died outside Freddy Fazbear's Pizza during business hours. She had been locked outside, a security measure or simple oversight that placed a small child alone in an alley while a party continued inside. The security puppet had been programmed to ensure children wearing specific identification bracelets remained inside the building. Charlotte wore a green bracelet. When she appeared outside the building perimeter, the puppet left its station to retrieve her. William Afton murdered Charlotte before the puppet arrived. A purple car appears in the minigame, parked nearby. Afton exits the vehicle, approaches Charlotte, and the screen fades. When the puppet reaches her body, rain has begun falling. The puppet short-circuits near Charlotte's corpse, and possession occurs. Her soul binds to the animatronic, creating the first documented case of supernatural consciousness transfer in the Five Nights at Freddy's universe. The circumstances reveal multiple aspects of Afton's predatory psychology. First, target selection. Charlotte was the daughter of Henry Emily, Afton's business partner and co-founder. This wasn't a random victim. This was personal. Possible motivations include revenge for his son's death, blame displaced onto Henry for creating the Fredbear animatronics, or simple opportunity exploitation. Charlotte was accessible, recognizable, and vulnerable. Killing her would hurt Henry the way Afton had been hurt. This mirrors patterns seen in revenge-motivated violence. Some offenders target family members or loved ones of people they blame for their pain. Afton couldn't punish Henry directly without exposing himself, but he could punish Henry's daughter. Second, Afton's comfort operating near security measures. Charlotte died during business hours at an active location. Customers and employees remained inside. The security puppet's programming is specifically monitored for endangered children. Yet Afton murdered Charlotte steps from the building's exit and escaped before the puppet arrived. He knew exactly how long he had before it could reach Charlotte. He knew the building's surveillance didn't cover the alley. He knew nobody would check that space during active service hours. Third, the use of environmental conditions. Rain began falling during the murder. Whether Afton chose this timing deliberately or adapted to weather conditions, the rain served his purposes. It drove people inside. It created noise masking screams or struggle. It short-circuited the security puppet before it could record what happened. Rain washes away evidence, contaminates crime scenes, obscures visibility. Fourth, Afton didn't move Charlotte's body. Leaving Charlotte in place served multiple purposes. It allowed possession to occur through the security puppet's proximity. It created the appearance of stranger abduction rather than premeditated murder by someone with building access. And most importantly, it meant Afton could observe the aftermath. Serial killers frequently return to crime scenes or follow investigation coverage obsessively. They want to know if their work was discovered, how authorities respond, whether their techniques succeeded. For Afton, the crime scene remained immediately accessible. He could return to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza in his legitimate capacity as co-founder, could express shock and concern, could observe Henry's grief personally. The murder's outcome confirmed something extraordinary. Supernatural possession occurred. Charlotte's consciousness survived death and bonded to the security puppet. For Afton, this validated everything. Death could be overcome. Souls could persist. His son could potentially be restored if Afton could replicate the conditions that created Charlotte's possession. This is where Afton's pathology deepens beyond comprehension. A normal person observing supernatural possession might feel horror, might question whether they'd unleashed something unnatural. Afton saw scientific data. He saw a successful experiment. He saw proof of concept that justified further experimentation. Charlotte's death became his control group, her possession became his baseline, and children became research subjects. The psychological term for this mindset is compartmentalization of victims. Serial killers who sustain killing sprees typically dehumanize their victims, viewing them as objects or obstacles rather than people. Afton took this further. His victims weren't even objects. They were test subjects in an experiment with his son's resurrection as the ultimate goal. This reframing allowed him to commit atrocities while maintaining internal narrative coherence. He wasn't murdering children. He was conducting necessary research. Every death brought him closer to solving death itself. But replicating Charlotte's possession required understanding the mechanics. What specific conditions allowed her soul to bind to the security puppet? Proximity seemed relevant. Emotional attachment might matter. The security puppet was programmed to protect Charlotte, creating potential psychological connection. Afton needed to test variables, to isolate factors, to determine whether possession could be reliably induced rather than randomly occurring. This required more children, more deaths, more experimental subjects, and Afton already had the perfect hunting ground: birthday parties at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, where children gathered in crowds, where mascot costumes roamed freely, where a man in a spring Bonnie suit could lead a child toward a back room without triggering any alarm. The missing children incident wasn't a sudden escalation. It was phase 2 of an experiment that began with Charlotte Emily's murder. And now that we have this cleared up, it's time to talk about one of the most important factors to the future of Afton's character: his motives. Chapter 5: The Psychology of Power. Serial killer typology categorizes offenders into 4 primary classifications based on motivation. Visionary killers respond to hallucinations or delusions. Mission-oriented killers target specific victim groups they deem undesirable. Hedonistic killers murder for pleasure, subdivided into thrill, lust, and comfort killers. Power control killers derive satisfaction from dominating victims. William Afton doesn't fit neatly into these categories, which makes him more realistic. Real serial killers rarely conform to single typologies. They exhibit mixed motivations, evolving patterns, and behaviors that shift across their criminal careers. Initially, Afton appears mission-oriented. His stated goal involved experimenting with Remnant to resurrect his son. Mission-oriented offenders typically believe their murders serve a greater good or fulfill a necessary purpose. They're not killing for pleasure. They're killing to accomplish something they've convinced themselves is justified. But Afton's mission was built on a foundation of narcissistic delusion. His son was dead. No evidence suggested resurrection was possible. Afton observed supernatural possession and extrapolated wildly, deciding that phenomenon could be weaponized for his purposes. This represents motivated reasoning. He wanted his son back so desperately that he interpreted ambiguous evidence as definitive proof his desired outcome was achievable. And once he established that internal justification, murder became a necessary step in a research process rather than a moral transgression. This mirrors cases like Harold Shipman, who killed elderly patients under the guise of medical mercy while actually feeding a God complex, or doctors and nurses who commit angel of death killings, convincing themselves they're ending suffering when they're actually exercising power over life and death. The justification becomes self-reinforcing. Each murder proves their ability to make life and death decisions. Each successful crime validates their sense of superiority over normal moral constraints. However, Afton's behavior also exhibits power control elements that distinguish him from purely mission-oriented killers. Power control offenders derive satisfaction from dominating victims, from the process of capture and murder rather than only from the outcome. They typically torture victims, prolong suffering, and create scenarios where the victim's helplessness is explicitly demonstrated. They want to see fear. They want acknowledgement of their power. Afton's use of the Spring Bonnie costume demonstrates this power dynamic. He could have killed children through numerous methods. Poison would be untraceable. Accidents could be arranged. But Afton chose a method that required direct interaction. He lured children personally. He led them to isolated rooms. They saw him, trusted him, followed him, and only then discovered their mistake. That progression from trust to terror represents power exercised over perception itself. Afton didn't just kill bodies. He killed the trust that made children feel safe around mascot characters. The costume also provided psychological distance while maintaining physical proximity. Afton could watch children's faces while his own remained hidden. He could see their fear without them seeing his expression. This asymmetry of perception appears frequently in power control crimes. Masks, blindfolds, and other methods of obscuring the killer's identity while forcing the victim to remain visible serve both practical and psychological purposes. Practically, they prevent identification. Psychologically, they reinforce the power dynamic. But the strongest evidence for Afton's power control motivation appears in his later behavior. After the missing children incident, after he had enough remnant for his supposed experiments, Afton continued killing. He built the fun-time animatronics with child capture mechanisms, creating an automated kidnapping system. He personally murdered additional children during later incidents. If his motivation was purely mission-oriented, he would have stopped once he collected sufficient experimental material. He didn't stop. He escalated. This escalation reveals the truth about Afton's motivations. The mission was always justification rather than cause. The real motivation was power, the ability to decide who lived and died, the ability to operate invisibly while communities searched for him, the intellectual satisfaction of outwitting investigators, the grandiose belief that he had discovered something fundamental about life and death that no one else understood. Consider his relationship with his victims. Afton targeted children specifically. This wasn't accidental. Children represent maximum vulnerability. They trust authority figures. They believe mascot costumes are safe. They can be manipulated through simple deception. For a power control offender, children provide the purest expression of domination. There's no physical contest. There's barely psychological resistance. The power dynamic is absolute. This targeting pattern appears in cases involving predators who specifically seek vulnerable populations. Joseph D'Angelo stalked couples, attacking when maximum vulnerability was guaranteed. Ted Bundy approached women wearing a fake cast, exploiting their instinct to help someone who appeared injured. Dennis Rader bound entire families, controlling every person in the household before killing them individually. The vulnerability is the point. The helplessness is the goal. Afton took this further by targeting children in spaces designed to make them feel safe. Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was a children's entertainment venue. Parents brought their families there specifically because it was supposed to be a safe, supervised environment. By corrupting that space, by making it a hunting ground, Afton violated the psychological contract that made the business possible. He weaponized trust itself. Afton recognized that children's trust in mascot characters created opportunities other predators couldn't exploit. A stranger approaching a child on a playground triggers alarm. A beloved character inviting a child to come see something special triggers excitement. By inhabiting the Spring Bonnie costume, Afton transformed himself from stranger danger into trusted friend. This represents manipulation at a cognitive level, exploiting developmental vulnerabilities specific to childhood. The aftermath of his crimes also reveals power control satisfaction. Afton never confessed. He never showed remorse. Phone Guy's tapes mentioned that someone was caught and convicted for the missing children incident, but the bodies were never found. If Afton was arrested, he gave investigators nothing. He maintained control even during interrogation. This defiance appears frequently in power control offenders. They view cooperation as a weakness. Maintaining secrets means maintaining power over investigators who can't solve the case without their cooperation. More significantly, Afton continued operating after arrest and conviction. Whether he served time and was released, or whether the conviction was overturned on appeal, Afton returned to his activities. Most criminals who face consequences either desist from fear of further punishment or escalate recklessly. Afton did neither. He refined his methods. He built better hunting tools. He adapted his approach but maintained his core pattern. He believed himself untouchable because, from his perspective, he had proven himself untouchable. This confidence stems from a combination of factors. First, his organizational skills. Afton was genuinely intelligent, technically proficient, and capable of planning elaborate operations. These aren't stupid crimes. These are sophisticated crimes that require advanced knowledge and meticulous preparation. Second, his insider status. Being co-founder, he understood every security measure because he helped implement them. Third, his psychological advantage over investigators. Police looked for someone who hated children. Afton built his entire career around children's entertainment. The cognitive dissonance made him invisible, but confidence can metastasize into recklessness. Power control killers often escalate until they're caught, not because their methods fail, but because their need for greater challenges exceeds their caution. Afton exhibited this pattern through his creation of the Funtime animatronics. These machines represented Afton's most grandiose crime. He wasn't just killing children anymore. He was building automated killing machines disguised as entertainment. The Funtime animatronics could sing, dance, perform elaborate shows, and also capture children within stomach cavity compartments using retractable claws. Afton literally engineered murder into entertainment, creating a system where he could kill without even being present. Most serial killers dream of kill rooms, of perfect crimes, of systems that let them kill at scale without risk. Very few achieve this. Afton built it. He incorporated it into a legitimate business rental service. The audacity is breathtaking. The psychology is terrifying. But this is also where Afton made his first major mistake. The mistake that cost him something irreplaceable and revealed the fundamental flaw in his power control psychology. He didn't account for the possibility that his own family could become victims of his creations. Because while Afton was building his automated killing machines, while he was perfecting his experiments, while he was reveling in his power over life and death, his daughter Elizabeth approached one of the fun-time animatronics during a private demonstration, and Circus Baby did exactly what it was programmed to do. The claw activated, Elizabeth was captured, and William Afton experienced the second child death caused by his own negligence and design. Elizabeth's soul possessed Circus Baby, confirming Afton's theories about possession mechanics. Her death was tragic, but it was also proof of concept. His daughter became a successful experiment. That response reveals the depth of Afton's pathology. He had moved beyond compartmentalization into complete detachment from normal human emotion. His daughter died because of technology he built specifically to kill children, and his primary response was scientific satisfaction that the technology worked as intended. This represents psychopathy in its most clinical form, the complete absence of emotional bonding or empathy even toward one's own children, which means we need to revise our understanding of Afton's motivations one more time. He wasn't a grieving father who became a monster. He was always a monster. His son's death simply gave him permission to stop pretending otherwise. And once he stopped pretending, once he fully embraced what he was, William Afton's body count began to climb in earnest. Chapter 6. The Missing Children. 5 children disappeared from Freddy Fazbear's Pizza on June 26. Newspaper clippings in the original game reference the incident vaguely. Children lured to a back room by someone in a mascot costume. Bodies never recovered, one suspect arrested but later released due to insufficient evidence. The restaurant's reputation never recovered. The animatronics began exhibiting strange behaviors. Parents complained about odors coming from the machines, about mucus and blood leaking from their eyes and mouths. Those weren't mechanical malfunctions. Those were decomposition symptoms. Afton had hidden the bodies inside the animatronic suits. Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and Golden Freddy each became a tomb for a murdered child. The security puppet, still possessed by Charlotte Emily, somehow facilitated the possession process. The Give Gifts, Give Life minigame shows the puppet placing masks on dead children, binding their souls to the animatronics, the same way Charlotte's soul had bonded to the puppet itself. Whether this was Charlotte's decision or simply an automatic process stemming from her supernatural nature remains ambiguous. Either way, 5 more children joined her in the space between life and death. From a criminal methodology standpoint, this represents Afton's most brazen operation. 5 children don't disappear simultaneously without coordination. Afton had to isolate each child individually, kill them, and conceal the bodies before anyone noticed the pattern developing. This required perfect timing, intimate knowledge of the restaurant's blind spots, and psychological manipulation sophisticated enough to prevent any child from alerting others before Afton completed his work. Serial killers who claim multiple victims in single events typically operate in isolated locations where they control the environment completely. The Ketty Cabin murders involved a family killed in a remote mountain cabin. The Hinterkaifeck murders occurred on an isolated farm. Richard Speck killed 8 nurses in a Chicago townhouse after forcing entry and securing the location. These crimes succeed because the killer establishes total, environmental control before beginning. Afton achieved this control inside an active business during operating hours. This shouldn't have been possible. Children at birthday parties are supervised by parents, monitored by staff, surrounded by witnesses. But Afton exploited specific psychological vulnerabilities that made parents lower their guard. The environment itself signaled safety. Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was a family entertainment venue. Parents brought children there specifically because it was safe. This cognitive bias made unusual behavior less noticeable. A child wandering away at a park triggers immediate alarm. A child wandering toward the stage to see animatronics triggers no concern. Second, Afton weaponized the mascot costume's authority. Children are trained to trust authority figures, police officers, firefighters, teachers, and by extension mascot characters at entertainment venues. When Spring Bonnie beckoned a child to follow, that child's entire social conditioning said following was acceptable. The costume transformed Afton from stranger to authority, bypassing every protective instinct parents had taught their children. Third, Afton likely used progressive isolation. Rather than targeting 5 children simultaneously, he probably selected victims over an extended period during a large event. Birthday parties at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza could involve dozens of children. In that chaos, one child following Spring Bonnie toward a back room wouldn't immediately register as suspicious. By the time parents noticed their child was missing, Afton had already killed them and moved them to a concealment location. The delay between disappearance and alarm meant Afton was never caught in the act. Fourth, the safe room provided perfect concealment. These hidden spaces didn't appear on digital floor plans. Animatronics couldn't enter them. Most staff didn't know they existed. Afton could store bodies there temporarily, then transfer them to animatronic suits during after-hours access when no witnesses were present. This two-stage concealment meant even if someone discovered the safe room, they wouldn't find bodies. And even if someone noticed the animatronics were behaving strangely, they wouldn't think to look inside them. The psychological sophistication here exceeds typical serial killer methodology. Most predators don't plan past the murder itself. They kill impulsively, dispose of bodies carelessly, and get caught because forensic evidence connects them to victims. Afton planned the entire crime life cycle: victim selection, isolation method, kill location, body disposal, evidence elimination, and continued operation afterward. This represents criminal enterprise thinking applied to serial murder. But Afton made mistakes, small errors that accumulate into patterns investigators eventually recognize. The first mistake was volume. 5 children from one location during one event draws massive attention. Isolated disappearances spread across months or years are difficult to connect. 5 simultaneous victims creates an undeniable pattern. Law enforcement mobilized. Media coverage intensified. Public pressure demanded arrests. The second mistake was the bodies themselves. Afton hid them ingeniously, but he hid them on site. The animatronics remained at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, meaning evidence remained at the crime scene. As decomposition progressed, the smell became noticeable. Parents complained. Health inspectors investigated. Eventually, someone was going to examine those animatronics closely enough to discover what was inside them. The third mistake was his own psychology. Power control killers derive satisfaction from revisiting crime scenes, from observing investigation, from watching communities react to their work. Afton couldn't stay away. He remained involved with Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, maintained his business connections, possibly even participated in investigation discussions. This proximity eventually drew suspicion. Someone wearing a mascot costume lured the children. Afton had access to mascot costumes. The logic was straightforward. Phone guy's messages referenced that someone was arrested. The case never went to trial, suggesting insufficient evidence or procedural errors. But Afton was identified as a suspect. His invisibility was compromised. From this point forward, he operated under implicit suspicion. A normal person would stop. The risk had become too great. The pattern was too visible. Continuing guaranteed eventual capture. But Afton wasn't normal. He was a power control killer whose grandiose self-perception convinced him he could outsmart any investigation. He had already gotten away with multiple murders. He had already been arrested and released. From his perspective, this confirmed his superiority. The system couldn't touch him because he was smarter than the system. After intense criminal activity, some offenders pause. They wait for investigation to subside, for public attention to shift elsewhere, for their psychological arousal to rebuild. But cooling off periods vary dramatically. Some killers wait years between crimes. Others can't wait months. The length of the cooling off period inversely correlates with compulsion strength. The faster a killer returns to criminal activity, the less control they have over their impulses. Evidence suggests Afton continued criminal activity relatively soon after the missing children incident. The Save Them minigame shows additional dead children, implied to be victims of Afton's continued experiments. He didn't stop. He barely slowed down. This suggests his compulsion had reached a point where external risk couldn't override internal need. That compulsion stemmed from multiple sources. First, his experiments with Remnant remained incomplete. He hadn't successfully resurrected his son. Each murder was supposed to bring him closer to understanding the mechanics of possession, to perfecting the technique, to finally achieving his stated goal. As long as that goal remained unfulfilled, Afton had justification to continue killing. Second, the murders themselves had become rewarding, independent of their supposed purpose. Power control satisfaction is addictive. Each successful crime reinforces the behavior. Each time Afton evaded consequences, his sense of invincibility strengthened. The mission-oriented justification may have initiated his killing, but by this point, the power control gratification was sustaining it. He was killing because killing made him feel godlike. Third, Afton had crossed a psychological threshold that makes stopping nearly impossible. In criminal psychology, this is called moral disengagement. It occurs when offenders rationalize their crimes so thoroughly that normal moral constraints no longer apply. Afton had killed his business partner's daughter, had killed 5 children at his own restaurant, had watched his daughter die because of technology he built to kill other children, and had remained committed to his course. His moral disengagement was complete. Children weren't people anymore. They were resources he could exploit for his purposes. This moral disengagement appears in the most prolific serial killers. Dennis Rader killed 10 people across 17 years. Ted Bundy confessed to 30 murders. Gary Ridgway admitted to 49 killings, possibly more. These body counts require complete detachment from victims' humanity. Each person becomes an object, a challenge, a source of satisfaction. The individual identities don't matter. Only the act matters. For Afton, this detachment extended even to his own children. His youngest son died, and Afton's response was to experiment on other children. His daughter died, and Afton's response was to view her death as successful data collection. An entire family was destroyed, and Afton's primary emotion was frustration that his experiments hadn't yet succeeded. But experiments require resources. Afton needed more victims, more controlled conditions, more sophisticated methods for inducing and studying possession. The missing children incident had drawn too much attention to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. He needed a new approach, a new hunting ground, a new method that would let him kill at scale without the scrutiny that followed his previous crimes. He needed the fun-time animatronics. He needed Circus Baby's Pizza World. He needed Afton Robotics and the rental service that would place his killing machines directly into homes and private venues where supervision was minimal. and evidence could be easily concealed. Most serial killers are caught because they can't stop themselves. They kill impulsively, make mistakes, leave evidence. Afton was different. He built his entire professional life around creating opportunities to kill. He designed animatronics specifically for kidnapping children. He established a business that placed those animatronics in locations where they could operate unsupervised. He created a legitimate corporate structure to support industrial-scale child murder. This represents the most dangerous type of offender imaginable, one who combines organizational sophistication with complete moral disengagement and genuine intelligence. Most serial killers have one or two of these traits. Afton had all three. He could have stopped at any time. He had wealth, professional success, and the technical skills to pursue any legitimate career. He chose to build a child-killing machine instead. That choice reveals what Afton truly was beneath all the justifications, beneath all the mission-oriented rhetoric about resurrecting his son. He was a sadist. He enjoyed what he was doing. The experiments were cover. The grief was excuse. The real motivation was the power he felt, watching his machines do exactly what he designed them to do. And when Circus Baby killed Elizabeth, when his daughter became another victim of his creations, Afton's reaction confirmed this. He didn't stop. He didn't destroy the machines. He didn't turn himself in. He deactivated the rental service temporarily, hid the Funtime animatronics in an underground facility, and eventually returned to his work. Elizabeth's death was inconvenient, but it wasn't enough to override his compulsion. This brings us to the moment where Afton's luck finally ran out, not because investigators caught him, not because evidence finally connected him definitively to his crimes, but because the children he murdered became something he hadn't anticipated. They became vengeful, they became active, and they came for him. The spring lock failure that killed William Afton wasn't an accident. It was an execution carried out by his own victims, ghosts of children he had murdered years earlier, finally cornering him in the same restaurant where he had killed them. Chapter 7. The Death Loop. Picture the moment from Afton's perspective. He's back at the abandoned Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location, the building where his most infamous crimes occurred. The place has been closed for years. The animatronics are still here, deactivated but not destroyed. He's dismantling them one by one, tearing them apart. Maybe he's harvesting remnant. Maybe he's destroying evidence. Maybe he's simply unable to resist returning to his crime scene one last time. Then the ghosts appear. Not metaphorical ghosts, actual supernatural manifestations of the children he murdered. They corner him. They chase him through rooms he once controlled completely. The predator becomes prey. The man who derived satisfaction from children's terror experiences terror himself. His back hits a wall, nowhere left to run. The ghosts close in. Afton sees the spring Bonnie suit, the same costume he wore when he lured these children to their deaths. In a moment of desperate irony, he climbs inside it. The suit that once made him powerful, that once gave him access and anonymity and control, becomes his refuge. He's laughing in the mini-game. Even cornered, even terrified, some part of Afton still believes the suit will protect him. That spring Bonnie will save him the way it saved him from consequence so many times before. Then the spring locks fail. Water drips from the ceiling. A leak in the abandoned building's deteriorating roof. Moisture touches the spring lock mechanisms. They release. Every metal component that had been compressed to allow human occupancy snaps back into animatronic configuration. Crossbeams drive through Afton's torso. Artificial ribs crush his lungs. The animatronic jaw slams closed on his skull. Metal rods pierce organs, limbs, every soft part of his body. He doesn't die immediately. Spring lock failures are designed to be survivable long enough for the employee to move away from customers before bleeding out. Phone Guy's training tapes make this horrifyingly clear. Please try to maneuver away from populated areas before bleeding out, as not to ruin the customer experience. Afton has minutes, possibly longer, to experience exactly what's happening to his body. Every breath pulls metal deeper into his lungs. Every movement causes new punctures. The suit has become an Iron Maiden, and he's locked inside it with no way to escape. Afton derived power from the suit. The suit became his method, his identity, his advantage over victims who trusted the character it represented. Now that same suit destroys him. The tool of his power becomes the instrument of his execution. The costume that let him hide becomes the tomb he'll never leave. But here's where the supernatural elements of Five Nights at Freddy's create something worse than death. Afton doesn't die cleanly. His soul, saturated with remnant from years of experimentation, binds to the Spring Bonnie suit the same way his victims' souls bound to the animatronics he stuffed them inside. William Afton becomes Springtrap, a corpse inside a mascot costume, possessed by the murderer's own consciousness, trapped in the exact configuration he trapped his victims. This should be the end. Poetic justice delivered. Murderer killed by his own methods. Body never found, left to rot inside an abandoned building. But Afton's story doesn't end. Because 30 years later, someone finds the Spring Bonnie suit, still containing Afton's barely preserved corpse, and brings it to Fazbear's Fright, the horror attraction. The gameplay of Five Nights at Freddy's 3 makes Springtrap the primary antagonist. He stalks the player through the building, moving between rooms, appearing in windows, trying to reach the security office. The game presents this as a haunted attraction gone wrong, a possessed animatronic terrorizing the night guard. But understanding Afton's psychology reframes everything. Springtrap isn't a ghost mindlessly haunting a location. It's William Afton, still conscious, still intelligent, still operating with the same predatory psychology that defined his living existence. He spent 30 years trapped in that suit, 30 years unable to move, unable to speak, unable to do anything except remain conscious inside a rotting corpse. That kind of isolation would break most minds completely. But Afton's mind was already broken. The isolation just gave him time to think. What does a serial killer think about during 30 years of forced stillness? Does he experience remorse? Does he replay his crimes? Does he plan what he'll do if he ever gets free? For Afton, the evidence suggests the latter. The moment he can move again, the moment someone brings his body to a new location, he starts hunting. He doesn't seek escape. He doesn't attempt communication. He stalks the night guard with the same predatory methodology he used on children decades earlier. Most people would be psychologically destroyed by that experience. Death should have ended his consciousness entirely. Supernatural binding to an animatronic suit should have resulted in mindless hauntings similar to the child ghosts. Instead, Afton retains strategic thinking, planning ability, and goal-oriented behavior. His personality survived everything that should have destroyed it. Some inmates become institutionalized, losing the ability to function outside controlled environments. Others maintain their antisocial personalities indefinitely. Ted Bundy remained manipulative and grandiose through his entire imprisonment. Dennis Rader cooperated with police after arrest but showed no genuine remorse, treating interrogation as an opportunity to finally discuss his crimes openly. Afton's behavior as Springtrap suggests similar psychological persistence. He isn't haunting Fazbear's Fright, he's hunting there. He hasn't forgotten how to stalk prey, how to exploit environmental advantages, how to pursue targets with patience and planning. 30 years didn't teach him remorse. They taught him to wait, and when opportunity returned, so did his pattern. But Fazbear's Fright burns down at the end of the third game. The building catches fire during the final night, possibly started deliberately by the player character. The blaze destroys the attraction completely. Springtrap is inside when it happens. This should kill him. Fire destroys Remnant, according to later lore. Burning the suit should release Afton's soul, should finally end his persistence. Instead, Afton survives. The suit is damaged, charred, barely functional. But he survives. And he continues. And this is the pattern that defines the rest of William Afton's existence. He doesn't stop. He can't be stopped. Every attempt to end him fails. Every method that should work doesn't. He persists beyond death, beyond justice, beyond any reasonable narrative conclusion. Even as a corpse, even trapped in a failing suit, even without the resources and planning he once commanded, Afton refuses to surrender. Control. Death should have ended him. Spring lock failure should have ended him. Fire should have ended him. Each time he finds a way to persist. Not through clever planning anymore, through pure refusal to accept defeat. Serial killers often view capture as ultimate failure. Their entire identity revolves around evading consequence, around proving they're smarter than investigators. Arrest represents the collapse of that identity. Some killers commit suicide rather than face trial. Others cooperate immediately once caught, the psychological structure that sustained their crimes collapsing once they can't operate in secret anymore. Afton never accepted defeat. As Springtrap, he continued pursuing victims despite having no strategic advantage. The horror attraction contained one potential victim and multiple escape routes the night guard could use. Afton had no tools, no planning, no methods beyond shambling after someone through camera-monitored hallways. This wasn't sophisticated hunting. This was compulsion driving him forward despite tactical hopelessness. He doesn't kill for Remnant anymore. He doesn't kill for experiments. He doesn't kill to resurrect his son. Those justifications have long since become irrelevant. He kills because killing is what he does. His identity is predator. His purpose is hunting. Remove every justification, strip away every resource, burn his body until it barely functions. And he still moves toward victims because he has no other mode of existence. This is what maximum moral disengagement creates. A person who continues harmful behavior even when it serves no purpose, even when it harms them, even when it's impossible to justify. The behavior becomes the identity. Stopping would mean ceasing to exist. So they don't stop. They can't stop. They are the behavior and nothing else remains. But Afton's persistence creates a problem for everyone else in the Freddy's universe. Most serial killers eventually die. Their crimes end when they die. Their victims find closure knowing the predator is gone. Afton denies everyone that closure. He survives his own death. He survives attempts to destroy him. He keeps returning, keeps threatening, keeps existing in a state that shouldn't be possible. Most serial killers are human monsters, terrifying but comprehensible. Afton became a supernatural force, an undying threat that can't be permanently stopped through any conventional means. He's the nightmare that won't end even when it should. He's the predator who hunts from beyond the grave. Chapter 8. The Infection. Fazbear's fright burned completely. Springtrap was inside. Evidence suggested he burned with it. But Afton survived. The suit was damaged beyond recognition, held together by wiring and Remnant and sheer refusal to stop existing. He became Scraptrap, a more deteriorated version of Springtrap with exposed bone visible through gaps in the costume. One arm replaced with skeletal components. The entire structure barely cohesive. Remnant isn't just soul energy. It's a binding agent that prevents consciousness from dispersing after death. Normal ghosts fade eventually. Remnant-sustained ghosts persist indefinitely. Afton had experimented with Remnant extensively, had exposed himself to it repeatedly, had likely injected or consumed it trying to achieve immortality. His body was saturated with the substance. This saturation meant fire couldn't destroy him, the way it destroyed normal, remnant-possessed animatronics. His connection was too strong, too integrated. Burning his suit damaged his physical form, but couldn't sever the supernatural binding keeping his consciousness anchored. He was locked into existence, unable to die properly, unable to move on, trapped in a deteriorating body that should have failed years ago. He wanted to overcome death. He succeeded. He achieved immortality. But immortality without the ability to heal, without the ability to improve his condition, without anything except continued consciousness inside a rotting corpse, is indistinguishable from eternal torture. Afton got exactly what he wanted, and it became his damnation. But Afton's response to this situation reveals his pathology hasn't changed. Most people trapped in eternal undeath would seek release. They would beg for final death. They would view their continued existence as a curse rather than blessing. Afton doubled down. He returned to the pizzeria simulator location, apparently drawn by the presence of other possessed animatronics. He continued hunting. He continued pursuing whatever goals sustained him. Eternal suffering didn't break him because suffering wasn't what mattered. Control mattered, power mattered. As long as he could still affect the world, still hunt, still exist as threat, his purpose remained intact. Ted Bundy killed 30 people and faced execution. Gary Ridgway killed 49 and received a life imprisonment. Their crimes ended. Their threat ended. Afton's threat continues past every stopping point that should have ended it. His persistence becomes its own form of violence. Communities can't heal when the predator still exists. Victims can't find peace when their murderer still hunts. Afton's refusal to die becomes a final crime committed against everyone he ever hurt. The pizzeria simulator ending attempts to solve this. Henry Emily, Afton's former business partner, designs a trap. He builds a restaurant specifically to lure possessed animatronics to a single location. Afton, his daughter Elizabeth, his son inside one of the animatronics, and Charlotte Emily inside the puppet all gather there. Henry sets the building on fire, ensuring maximum heat to destroy Remnant completely. His recorded message makes the intent clear. This is a mass funeral pyre designed to finally end everyone's suffering. Henry understands what Afton is. Not a victim of circumstance, not someone misguided by grief. A monster who chose monstrosity repeatedly across decades. The fire represents final judgment, the ultimate consequence Afton evaded during life. This should work. Maximum heat, controlled environment, every possessed animatronic destroyed simultaneously. Afton should burn, his remnant should dissipate. His consciousness should finally disperse. Instead, Afton's consciousness fragments into digital space. Fazbear Entertainment had been scanning circuit boards from old animatronics to develop a VR game. Springtrap's circuit board was scanned. Afton's consciousness, encoded somehow into the digital information, transferred into the game's code. He became Glitch Trap, a virtual entity capable of possessing players through prolonged exposure to the VR experience. Afton is no longer physically present. He's not even bound to a specific object anymore. He exists as information, as corrupted data, as a virus that infects minds rather than bodies. Glitch Trap can spread through networks, can copy himself across systems, can potentially exist in multiple locations simultaneously. Afton achieved true persistence. Destroying his body became irrelevant because his consciousness no longer required a body. Early serial killers operated locally, hunting in familiar areas. Later offenders traveled, selecting victims across state lines to frustrate investigation. Modern predators use digital tools, approaching victims through social media, creating networks that enable crimes at scale. Afton followed this evolution to its endpoint. He became the methodology itself, consciousness reduced. to predatory code that could infect new hosts and perpetuate indefinitely. Glitchtrap's behavior confirms Afton's core psychology persists even in digital form. He doesn't simply haunt the VR game. He actively seeks to possess players, to influence them, to use them as vessels for continued criminal activity. One player, later known as Vanny, becomes his primary subject. Glitchtrap manipulates her through the VR experience, gradually eroding her autonomy until she becomes his accomplice. He's rebuilt his capacity to kill, using a human proxy controlled through supernatural influence. Some offenders recruit accomplices who commit crimes on their behalf. Charles Manson convinced followers to commit murders while maintaining psychological control over them. Many other cult examples involve charismatic predators who weaponize influence to extend their criminal reach beyond personal action. Afton's manipulation of Vanny follows similar patterns. He doesn't command directly. He insinuates. He suggests. He rewards behavior that aligns with his goals and punishes resistance. Gradually, Vanny's personality fragments. She develops an alter ego that serves Afton's purposes, while her original personality remains horrified by her own actions. The Security Breach storyline shows Vanny hunting children through the Pizzaplex under Glitchtrap's influence. Afton has successfully recreated his original crimes using a new body, new methods, new infrastructure. He adapted from physical to digital existence and rebuilt his predatory capacity within that new framework. But Glitchtrap's existence raises disturbing questions about whether William Afton can ever truly be stopped. His body was destroyed. His remnant was burned. His consciousness survived by transferring to digital space. If you delete the game code, does he simply copy himself to backup servers? If you destroy every computer containing his data, does some fragment persist in network architecture? Afton has become information, and information is nearly impossible to completely eradicate. Every crime committed against past victims becomes a crime that continues indefinitely. Afton murdered Charlotte Emily decades ago. Her death launched his killing spree. As long as Afton exists in any form, Charlotte's murder remains ongoing. The trauma doesn't end because the source of trauma refuses to end. This explains why Afton is so deeply unsettling as a villain. Most horror monsters are forces of nature. They're dangerous but not personal. Afton is profoundly personal. He was a father, a businessman, a person who made choices. Every crime he committed resulted from decisions he could have made differently. And even after facing consequences, even after dying, even after losing everything, he refuses to accept that his choices were wrong. He refuses to stop. He refuses to acknowledge he should stop. Narcissists view themselves as exceptional, beyond rules that constrain normal people. When confronted with evidence contradicting their self-image, they don't revise their beliefs. They reject the evidence. Afton died horribly, suffered 30 years trapped in decay, burned multiple times, lost his physical form entirely. Each event should have taught him that his approach failed. Instead, each event became an obstacle he overcame, confirming his superiority. He survived what should have killed him, so clearly he was meant to survive. This pathological persistence makes Afton the ideal horror villain for a specific reason. He can't be defeated through normal means, because he doesn't accept defeat as possible. You can burn him, you can trap him, you can delete his code. He'll find a way to persist because his entire identity revolves around refusing limitations. This creates horror that compounds with every failed attempt to stop him. The audience knows he should be dead. The characters know he should be dead. Afton knows he should be dead. He doesn't care. He continues anyway. Chapter 9. The Pattern Recognition. We've examined Afton's background, his psychology, his victims, his methods. We've traced his evolution from living human to possessed corpse to digital consciousness. Now we face the question that defines the horror of Freddy's Why can't he be stopped? The practical answers are supernatural. Remnant sustains his consciousness past death. His soul fragments across multiple substrates. Digital existence allows infinite copying, but these are narrative mechanics that enable his persistence. The deeper answer is psychological. Afton can't be stopped because he refuses to accept that he can be stopped. Normal humans accept limitations. They understand that death ends consciousness, that destruction ends existence, that defeat requires cessation. Psychopaths sometimes reject these limitations emotionally, while understanding them intellectually. Afton rejects them entirely. His belief in his own superiority is so absolute that reality itself bends, rather than Afton accepting constraints. Some criminals genuinely believe they're too intelligent to be caught. When caught, they believe they're too important to be convicted. When convicted, they believe they'll be released, because the system will recognize its error. This delusional grandiosity persists despite overwhelming contradictory evidence, because the core narcissistic belief can't be challenged without psychological collapse. Afton's persistence represents this grandiosity made literal through supernatural mechanics. His belief that he couldn't be defeated became self-fulfilling through remnant binding. His consciousness persisted because the alternative, accepting limitation, accepting defeat, accepting that he was wrong, was psychologically impossible. Death should have ended him. He refused to accept death as an ending. Somehow, that refusal manifested as actual persistence. His will literally prevented his dispersal. Most ghosts fade because their identity dissolves. Afton's identity was too rigid, too absolute, too psychopathically fixed to allow dissolution. He remained coherent through sheer narcissistic refusal to accept that anything could truly end William Afton. Afton survives because Afton must survive. His entire psychological structure is built on his own superiority. Evidence contradicting that superiority can't be processed or integrated. It must be rejected, and if reality insists he should be dead, then reality must be wrong. You can't reason with someone whose psychology prevents them from accepting reason. You can't defeat someone whose core identity requires belief in their invincibility. Every attempt to stop Afton reinforces his belief system by providing another obstacle he overcomes. Each failure to permanently destroy him confirms his internal narrative about his own superiority. This is why Henry's trap fails. Henry designed perfect containment and termination. Optimal heat, controlled environment, remnant destruction. The plan should work. Afton survives because he psychologically cannot accept defeat, even when defeat is mechanically guaranteed. His consciousness fragments and escapes, rather than dispersing, because dispersal would require accepting that Henry outwitted him. That acceptance is psychologically impossible. So Afton's unstoppability isn't just about remnant or supernatural mechanics. It's about a malignancy so pathological that it infects the very technology intended to replace him. He is what happens when narcissism reaches levels so extreme that existence itself restructures to accommodate the delusion rather than forcing confrontation with limitations. We live in an era where malignant narcissism occupies highly visible positions. We watch individuals commit obvious wrongs while maintaining absolute certainty in their righteousness. We see patterns where people cause massive harm while genuinely believing they're victims of unfair persecution. The cognitive dissonance between their actions and their self-perception is so complete that evidence means nothing. They simply reject reality when reality conflicts with their self-image. Afton represents this psychology in its most concentrated form. He murdered children for decades. He destroyed families. He corrupted an institution. He caused immeasurable suffering. And he maintains absolute conviction that he did nothing wrong. His obsession with conquering death and harvesting remnant justified every crime. His intellectual superiority meant normal moral rules didn't apply to him. His achievements meant he deserved to persist beyond normal human constraints. Every excuse, every justification, every rationalization that allows real predators to maintain their self-image appears in Afton's psychology. He's not a monster who knows he's a monster. He's a monster who believes he's a visionary, a scientist, a father who sacrificed everything for his child. His internal narrative paints himself as a tragic figure rather than a predator. This self-deception allows him to continue without psychological collapse because he never confronts the reality of what he is. Real predators function the same way. They don't see themselves as evil. They have elaborate justifications for every harmful act. They genuinely believe they're misunderstood rather than malicious. This self-perception protects them from guilt that might otherwise trigger desistance. Afton's justifications, resurrection, experimentation, scientific advancement follow this pattern perfectly. He convinced himself his crimes served noble purposes. This conviction allowed him to continue committing them indefinitely. The horror of William Afton isn't that he's supernatural. It's that he's realistic. Remove the remnant and possession mechanics, and you're left with a documented psychological profile. Narcissistic personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, psychopathy, complete moral disengagement, grandiose self-perception, inability to accept limitation or defeat. These aren't fictional constructs. These are clinical diagnoses describing patterns that exist in reality. So when we ask why Afton can't be stopped, we're asking why certain human pathologies resist correction or treatment. We're asking why some predators continue despite interventions. We're asking why narcissistic delusions persist despite contradictory evidence. And the answer is uncomfortable. Some psychological structures are functionally irreparable. Some damage runs so deep that the person can't be restored to healthy functioning. Some pathologies are permanent. Recognizing that some offenders won't respond to rehabilitation doesn't mean giving up on justice. It means implementing appropriate containment for individuals who represent permanent threats. It means accepting that some people genuinely lack the capacity for change and structuring consequences accordingly. Afton represents the extreme end of this spectrum, pathology so complete that even death can't end it. Most predators eventually fade into history. Afton refuses even that basic courtesy. His persistence becomes the final insult to his victims, forcing them to continue experiencing threat from someone who should have been neutralized decades ago. The games aren't just about haunted animatronics. They're about unresolved trauma, institutional failure, and the impossibility of closure when accountability never arrives. Afton's supernatural persistence represents the very real persistence of trauma in victims' lives. The children can't move on because their murderer won't stay gone. Their peace is contingent on his ending, and he refuses to end. This dynamic appears in reality when predators evade consequence. Victims can't heal while knowing their abuser operates freely. Communities can't recover while predators remain active. Justice delayed becomes justice denied, and delayed indefinitely becomes permanent denial. Afton's endless resurrections literalize this endless deferral of justice. Every time he returns, it's another confirmation that closure will never arrive, that safety was always temporary, that the nightmare has no endpoint. The games frustrate audiences by denying clean endings. Afton dies repeatedly and returns repeatedly. The story refuses to end. This frustration mirrors victims' frustration when justice systems fail to deliver permanent accountability. The emotional experience of watching Afton return again mimics the emotional experience of watching predators escape consequence again. So Afton can't be stopped, because stopping him would require addressing systemic failures that remain unaddressed. It would require Fazbear Entertainment accepting responsibility instead of minimizing damage. It would require institutional reform instead of superficial policy changes. It would require genuine accountability instead of performative consequences. None of this happens in the narrative, so Afton keeps returning, because the conditions enabling him persist unchanged. Afton can be defeated narratively. He's been burned multiple times, but the institutional failures that enabled him continued through Fazbear Entertainment's persistent operation. New animatronics get built, new locations open, new night guards get hired with minimal explanation of danger. The pattern repeats because the institution learned nothing. They survive by refusing to learn. I always come back. He's not just threatening individual characters. He's describing institutional reality. Predators come back because institutions allow them to come back. They come back because systems prioritize continuity over accountability. They come back because nobody with power to stop them chooses to stop them permanently. Afton's supernatural persistence represents the very real persistence of predatory patterns across institutions. Catholic abuse didn't end when priests were defrocked. Hollywood abuse didn't end when Weinstein was imprisoned. Athletic abuse didn't end when Nassar was convicted. The individuals faced consequences, but the systems that enabled them remained largely intact. New predators emerged because the vulnerabilities they exploited weren't addressed systemically. Five Nights at Freddy's literalizes this dynamic through Afton's resurrections. He survives because nothing actually changed. The restaurants keep operating. The animatronics keep performing. The institutional incentives that made child safety secondary to profit remain operational. Burning Afton individually is like convicting one priest while leaving church hierarchy untouched. It addresses the symptom without treating the disease. Afton represents both individual evil and systemic failure. His crimes are his own, but their scale resulted from institutional enabling. Stopping him requires addressing both dimensions. The narrative focuses primarily on the individual dimension. Hunt down Afton, destroy his physical forms, delete his code. But the institutional dimension remains unaddressed and therefore unresolved. The story can't end because the institutional failures never get addressed. Fazbear Entertainment keeps operating, so new disasters keep occurring. New animatronics get possessed. New murders happen. New victims suffer. The cycle continues because the cycle was never actually interrupted. Chapter 10: What Remains. Strip away the supernatural elements. Remove the remnant, the possession, the digital consciousness. What's left is a man who made choices. Every murder was a decision. Every victim was selected deliberately. Every crime resulted from William Afton deciding that his goals mattered more than children's lives. This distinction between what he became and what he chose to become is crucial. Five Nights at Freddy's supernatural elements make Afton's persistence possible, but they don't make his crimes inevitable. Remnant didn't murder those children. William Afton murdered them. Technology didn't build the Funtime animatronics. William Afton built them. Digital corruption didn't manipulate Vanny. William Afton's consciousness manipulated her. Every horror element traces back to human choice. Afton chose murder. He chose experimentation. He chose to prioritize his obsessions over human welfare. The supernatural consequences flowed from those choices, but the choices themselves were purely human. This grounds the horror in moral reality. Ghosts and possessed animatronics are fantastical, but the human evil that created them is mundane. Afton wasn't a demon or monster. He was a businessman, a father, a community member. He existed in normal social spaces doing normal activities while simultaneously planning and executing murders. This dual existence, normal on the surface, monstrous underneath, reflects how real predators operate. They coach sports teams. They work as doctors. They attend church. They appear normal because most of the time they're performing normalcy. The predation happens in gaps between normal activities. Afton mastered this performance. He co-founded a beloved entertainment company. He designed animatronics that brought joy to children. He maintained business partnerships. He raised children. He fulfilled social roles that required appearing trustworthy and competent. And in the spaces between these performances, he murdered. This compartmentalization is what allowed his operation to continue for years. Nobody suspected him because suspecting him required reconciling his public image with incompatible private reality. The cognitive dissonance was too severe. Easier to believe that danger came from outside the institution than to confront that the institution's co-founder was the danger. Eventually, the performance collapsed. The spring lock failure trapped him physically. The children's ghosts exposed him spiritually. His body decayed, revealing literal rot that matched moral rot. What remained after the performance ended was a corpse inside a costume, which is grimly appropriate. Afton was always just performance concealing emptiness. Removing the performance left nothing but decay. Serial killers become this when their facades collapse. They're revealed as hollow. The charisma was manipulation. The charm was strategy. The normalcy was costume. Beneath the performance is either absence or, something worse than absence, intelligent malice pretending to be human. Afton represents this hollowness perfectly. As Springtrap, he's literally a corpse inside a costume. As Scraptrap, he's a barely functioning remnant of a corpse inside a damaged costume. As Glitchtrap, he's pure malice without even physical substrate. Each transformation strips away more humanity until only predatory essence remains. Death didn't transform him. It revealed what he always was. We naturally sympathize with his initial loss. His son died tragically. This would devastate any parent. But Afton's response to tragedy reveals he never processed it as loss. He processed it as a problem requiring a solution. His son's death wasn't an emotional reality requiring grief. It was a mechanical failure requiring technical correction. This emotional absence indicates Afton was never capable of genuine human connection. His children weren't people to him. They were possessions. His son dying wasn't losing someone he loved. It was losing something he owned. His response wasn't grief but wounded pride. Something that was his had been taken. This offense demanded correction. Normal grief involves accepting loss. Afton refused acceptance entirely. This refusal drove his experimentation, his murders, his obsessive pursuit of resurrection. But resurrection was always an excuse rather than a goal. The real motivation was narcissistic inability to accept that anything could be taken from him permanently. Death defied his will. This was intolerable. So he dedicated himself to defying death in return. Every murder afterward served this narcissistic project. He wasn't saving his son. He was proving his own superiority over limitation. He was demonstrating that rules constraining normal humans didn't apply to him. He was showing that William Afton's will superseded reality itself. His son was the vehicle for this demonstration, not the actual goal. Afton murdered children because he fundamentally couldn't accept that he couldn't have what he wanted. The specific want, his son alive, is almost irrelevant. Any unmet want could have triggered similar escalation because the core pathology was inability to accept limitations. So what remains of William Afton after we strip away justifications, supernatural elements, and sympathetic framing? What remains is a case study in pathological narcissism expressing itself through serial murder. He's a person whose personality structure prevented normal human functioning, whose response to that dysfunction was externalizing all consequences onto vulnerable others. He embodies patterns that appear across real criminal cases. His pathology is documented. His methods are researched. His victim selection is typical. His institutional protection is standard. Remove the names and setting, and you could be describing dozens of real offenders. This representative quality is why studying Afton has value beyond entertainment. He's a teaching tool for understanding how predatory psychology functions, how institutions enable predation, how pathological narcissism manifests behaviorally. Every element of his character reflects documented reality. Learning his patterns means learning patterns that exist beyond fiction. But what remains of the victims? The children became trapped in animatronics, unable to move on, unable to find peace. This represents trauma's persistence. Traumatic events end, but their psychological consequences continue indefinitely. The children are stuck reliving their deaths because that's what trauma does. It traps people in past moments, forcing constant re-experiencing. Charlotte Emily dying outside Freddy Fazbear's Pizza became an event she relives through the security puppet's existence. The missing children dying in back rooms became events they relived through the animatronics. Elizabeth dying inside Circus Baby became an event she relives through that animatronics consciousness. None of them get to move past their trauma because Afton's crimes created trauma so severe it bound their identities to the traumatic moment. Imagine dying and then being forced to relive your death every night for decades. Imagine your consciousness trapped in the location where you were murdered, unable to leave, unable to forget, unable to heal. This is the fate Afton's victims endured, and this fate persists as long as Afton persists. The children can't move on because their murderer won't stay gone. His continued existence keeps their trauma active. They can't heal while he still threatens. They can't find closure while he remains at large. His persistence denies them peace the same way real predators' freedom denies victims peace. So what remains after examining Five Nights at Freddy's completely is understanding that the true horror isn't the villain. It's what villains do to victims. It's the permanent damage inflicted by people who choose to harm others. It's the ongoing consequences that persist long after the actual violence ends. Afton is terrifying, but the children's fate is tragic. They're innocent victims trapped by another person's choices. They didn't choose to die. They didn't choose to be possessed. They didn't choose to spend decades hunting night guards and reliving trauma. Every aspect of their post-death existence resulted from William Afton deciding his goals mattered more than their lives. Awareness that predation creates permanent damage, that crimes against children destroy innocence irreparably, that trauma persists beyond physical healing, that some damages can't be repaired. Afton can be studied as a fascinating psychological case, but the children should be remembered as a cautionary reminder about what predation costs, and the cost is always borne by victims, never by the predators who create them. William Afton chose to wear a rabbit suit and murder children. That choice created decades of horror for multiple families. His supernatural persistence represents trauma's persistence in victims' lives. His refusal to stay dead represents how accountability fails when systems protect predators. His evolution across forms represents how predatory psychology adapts but never fundamentally changes. He's a serial killer analyzed through fiction but grounded in reality. His patterns are real. His psychology is documented. His methods are studied. The supernatural elements make him entertainment, but the foundation remains educational for anyone willing to examine it critically. That's who William Afton is, a teaching tool wrapped in a horror story, wrapped in a video game franchise.